Vincent Harper didn't want to be there. He made that clear the moment his sleek black car pulled up in front of Sunrise Children's Home on that gray Tuesday morning. His assistant had scheduled this visit 3 weeks ago, calling it good publicity for his real estate company. Vincent called it a waste of time. He stepped out of the car, adjusting his expensive suit jacket and checking his watch. 45 minutes, he told himself. Just 45 minutes of smiling for cameras, shaking hands, and then he could get back to his real life. Back to his office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, where everything made sense and nothing unexpected happened. The director of the home, Mrs. Patterson, rushed to greet him at the entrance. She was a plump woman in her 60s with kind eyes and flour stains on her apron. She'd clearly been baking with the children when his car arrived. "Mr. Harper, thank you so much for coming," she said, her voice warm but slightly nervous. "The children are so excited to meet you, and we can't thank you enough for the generous donation." Vincent gave her his practiced smile, the one that looked genuine in photographs but never quite reached his eyes. Of course. Happy to help. He'd written a check last month, a big one, the kind of check that would get his company's name in the local newspaper and maybe earn him some tax benefits. Part of the donation had gone toward a beautiful grand piano that now sat in the home's main lobby. Vincent didn't particularly care about music, but his PR team thought it was a nice touch. Creative, inspiring. All those words that looked good in press releases. Mrs. Patterson led him inside, where about 20 children waited in the common area. They ranged from toddlers to teenagers, all dressed in their best clothes for the occasion. Some looked excited, others shy, and a few seemed completely uninterested in the rich man invading their space. The photographer from the local paper started snapping pictures as Vincent shook hands and made small talk. He complimented a little boy's drawing. He admired a girl's science project about volcanoes. He said all the right things, but his mind was already calculating how much longer he needed to stay. Then one of the older boys, maybe 13 or 14, stepped forward. He had messy brown hair and a challenging look in his eyes that Vincent immediately recognized. It was the same look he'd perfected as a kid growing up poor, before he'd made his first million. "So you're the guy who bought the fancy piano," the boy said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Vincent replied, his tone cooling slightly. "Can you even play it?" Mrs. Patterson's face went red. "Tommy, that's not appropriate," but Vincent held up his hand. He was used to people questioning him, doubting him. "No, it's fine. And no, Tommy, I can't play, but I appreciate good music when I hear it. That's why I wanted to give you all the opportunity to learn." Tommy crossed his arms. "Right, so it's just for show then." Something about the kid's attitude irritated Vincent more than it should have. Maybe it was because Tommy reminded him too much of his younger self. Angry, skeptical, refusing to be impressed by money alone. "You think you could do better?" Vincent asked, his voice taking on an edge. "Maybe I could," Tommy shot back. A few children giggled nervously. Mrs. Patterson looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole, but Vincent felt something he hadn't felt in years. A flicker of genuine emotion breaking through his usual boredom. He walked over to the grand piano and ran his hand along its polished surface. "Tell you what," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "If any of you kids can actually play this thing, and I mean really play it, not just bang on the keys, I'll be impressed. In fact, I'll be so impressed that I'd consider taking you home myself. How's that?" The room went completely silent. Even Tommy seemed stunned. Mrs. Patterson recovered first. "Mr. Harper, I don't think you mean—" "I'm serious," Vincent said. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice was asking him what he was doing. Why was he making such a ridiculous offer? But his pride had been pricked, and Vincent Harper didn't back down from anything. "If someone here has real talent, genuine talent, I'll start adoption paperwork tomorrow." He said it with a laugh, like it was all a joke. Like there was no way any of these kids could possibly impress him. After all, how good could a child in a group home really be? They didn't have private tutors or expensive lessons. They probably didn't have much of anything. "Well," Mrs. Patterson said carefully, her mind clearly racing, "actually, there is one child who plays. Nina. She's been teaching herself on the old upright we have in the back room." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Teaching herself? That's cute, but I'm talking about real skill. Nina is different," Mrs. Patterson insisted, her protective instincts kicking in. "She's got something special. I've heard her play, and I'm telling you it's beautiful. Vincent shrugged. Fine, bring her out. Let's hear it. Mrs. Patterson hesitated. She knew Nina was sensitive, quiet, the kind of child who lived inside her own world. This man with his expensive clothes and careless words could hurt her without even trying. But she also knew that Nina needed opportunities, needed someone to believe in her. She found Nina in the library, curled up in a corner with a book about composers. The girl was small for 10 years old, with straight dark hair and large brown eyes that seemed to carry more sadness than any child should know. Nina, honey, Mrs. Patterson said softly, there's someone who wants to hear you play. Nina's eyes widened. I don't want to play for people. I know, sweetie. But this is important. There's a man here who donated the new piano, and he doesn't think any of you children could really play it. I know you can. Will you show him? Nina bit her lip. She'd heard what the man said from the hallway. She'd heard him laugh, heard the mockery in his voice. Something in her chest burned, something that felt like anger mixed with determination. Her mother had always told her that music was powerful, that it could change hearts and minds. Maybe it was time to see if that was true. Okay, Nina whispered. I'll play. When Nina walked into the common area, Vincent barely glanced at her. She was just another skinny kid in worn jeans and a faded sweater. Nothing special. Nothing remarkable. Certainly not someone who could possibly win his ridiculous challenge. Nina walked to the piano on shaking legs. The instrument was beautiful. Far nicer than the old upright she practiced on every day. She sat on the bench and placed her small hands on the keys. Vincent checked his watch again and sighed. This was taking longer than planned. Then Nina began to play and everything changed. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. Nina's fingers moved across the keys like she was afraid they might break. Vincent glanced at Mrs. Patterson with a look that said, See? I told you so. This was going to be exactly what he expected, amateur, childish, forgettable. But then something shifted. Nina's shoulders relaxed. Her fingers found their confidence. The hesitant melody transformed into something else entirely. The notes began to flow together, creating a sound that filled every corner of the room. It wasn't a song anyone recognized. It wasn't from any famous composer or popular radio hit. This was something Nina had created herself, pulled from somewhere deep inside her. Vincent stopped checking his watch. The music told a story without using a single word. It started with something light and playful, like sunshine breaking through clouds. You could almost see a little girl running through a park, laughing, completely free. Then the melody changed. It grew softer, sadder. The notes fell like rain, like tears, like the sound of someone saying goodbye. Tommy, who had been standing with his arms crossed, slowly lowered them to his sides. A little girl who had been playing with her doll set it down gently. Even the photographer stopped taking pictures and just listened. Vincent felt something strange happening in his chest. A tightness, an ache. He tried to push it away, but Nina's music wouldn't let him. It was like she was reaching inside him and touching places he'd locked away years ago, places he'd promised himself he'd never visit again. The melody grew more complex. Nina's hands moved faster now, dancing across the keys with surprising strength for such a small child. There was pain in the music, yes, but there was also something else. Hope. Resilience. The sound of someone who had been broken but was slowly putting herself back together. Piece by piece, Mrs. Patterson had tears running down her face. She wasn't even trying to hide them. Several of the other staff members were crying too. They knew Nina's story. They knew what she'd been through in her short life. And somehow this quiet child who barely spoke to anyone had found a way to express it all through music. Vincent's throat felt tight. He swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure. He was a successful businessman. He didn't cry. He didn't get emotional over things like this. But the music kept pushing, kept pulling, kept refusing to let him hide behind his usual walls. The song built to something powerful. Nina's whole body moved with the music now. Her eyes were closed, and for the first time since she'd walked into the room, she didn't look scared. She looked free, lost in the only place where she felt truly safe, truly herself. Then gradually the music began to soften again. The notes grew gentler, like a storm passing. Like someone who had survived something terrible and was finally finding peace. The melody circled back to that opening theme, but it was different now. Wiser. Stronger. touched by sadness but not destroyed by it. Nina played the final notes so softly they were almost whispers. Then her hands lifted from the keys, and the room filled with the kind of silence that only comes after something extraordinary. For a long moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. Then someone started clapping. It was one of the younger children, a little boy who probably didn't fully understand what he'd just heard but knew it was special. The applause spread quickly. Soon everyone was clapping, some people cheering, others wiping their eyes. Nina opened her eyes and looked around, startled. Her face flushed red. She'd been so lost in the music that she'd almost forgotten she had an audience. She stood up quickly from the piano bench, looking like she wanted to run away and hide. But Mrs. Patterson was already there, pulling her into a hug. "That was beautiful, sweetheart." So beautiful. Vincent just stood there. His hands hung at his sides. He couldn't seem to make them work properly. Couldn't make anything work properly. That tight feeling in his chest had spread to his throat, his eyes, his entire body. He felt like he was standing on the edge of something. Like if he moved or spoke or even breathed too deeply, something inside him would completely shatter. The photographer started taking pictures again, capturing the moment. The children crowded around Nina, telling her how amazing she was. Tommy gave her an awkward but genuine high five. Even the shyest kids came forward to tell her they'd loved her playing. Through it all, Nina looked overwhelmed. Happy but overwhelmed. Like she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Mrs. Patterson finally guided the children toward the dining room, telling them it was time for lunch. As they filed out, chattering excitedly about Nina's performance, Vincent remained rooted in place. He stared at the piano like it might explain what had just occurred. Mrs. Patterson came back and stood beside him. She didn't say anything at first, just let him process whatever he was feeling. Her mother died 8 months ago, Mrs. Patterson finally said, her voice gentle. "Car accident." Nina was in the back seat. She wasn't hurt physically, but she paused. She didn't speak for 3 months after it happened. Not a single word. The only way she would communicate was through music. Vincent's jaw tightened. What about her father? Never in the picture. It was just Nina and her mother. They didn't have much money, but her mom made sure Nina had access to music somehow. Library books about composers. Free videos online. She'd sneak Nina into hotel lobbies sometimes just so she could practice on their pianos. That's where she learned? Vincent's voice came out rougher than he intended. That's where she learned. No formal lessons. No professional training. Just a little girl who loved music more than anything, and a mother who loved her enough to find ways to nurture that gift, even when they had nothing. Vincent turned away from the piano and walked to the window. Outside, the gray day matched the storm brewing inside him. He pressed his palm against the cool glass. I didn't think she'd actually be good, he admitted quietly. I know, Mrs. Patterson said. There was no judgment in her voice, just understanding. I was showing off. Being arrogant. Making stupid promises I never intended to keep. I know that too. Vincent closed his eyes. I said if she could play, I'd adopt her. Everyone heard me say it. The staff, the kids. That photographer probably caught it on camera. Yes, I can't. Vincent stopped, started again. I don't know how to be what she needs. Mrs. Patterson moved to stand beside him at the window. Mr. Harper, can I tell you something? Most people who walk through those doors see children who need things. Food, clothes, shelter, education. And yes, our kids need all of that. But what they need most is someone who sees them. Really sees them. You walked in here today thinking you were better than everyone in this building, and then a 10-year-old girl with nothing but a second-hand piano and a broken heart showed you what real talent looks like, what real courage looks like. Vincent didn't respond, couldn't respond. You made a promise, Mrs. Patterson continued. A big one. Maybe you meant it as a joke, but those children didn't hear it that way. Nina didn't hear it that way. She played her heart out for you. She showed you everything she is. Now the question is, what kind of man are you? The kind who keeps his word, or the kind who walks away? Vincent stood at that window for a long time after Mrs. Patterson left. He watched the clouds move across the sky. He thought about the music Nina had played. He thought about promises made and promises broken. He thought about a part of himself he'd buried so deep he'd almost forgotten it existed. Finally, he pulled out his phone and dialed his lawyer's number. Richard, he said when the man answered, I need you to start adoption paperwork. Yes, adoption. And Richard, I need it done right. No shortcuts. No rush jobs. I want everything perfect. He ended the call and took a deep breath. What had he just done? The paperwork took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of background checks, home inspections, interviews, and mountains of forms that needed signatures. Vincent threw money at the problem, hiring the best family lawyer in the state, but even money couldn't make the system move faster. Some things just took time. During those 6 weeks, he visited Nina at Sunrise Children's Home exactly 3 times. Each visit lasted less than an hour. He brought gifts, expensive things that made the other children's eyes go wide. A new tablet, designer clothes, fancy art supplies. Nina accepted them politely, quietly, but Vincent could never quite read the expression in her eyes. Mrs. Patterson watched these visits with concern. "She doesn't need things, Mr. Harper," she said after the 3rd visit. "She needs to know you." Vincent had nodded, promised to do better, and then left 15 minutes early because of an important business call. The day finally came when Nina could leave the children's home. Vincent sent his assistant to pick her up. He told himself it was because he had meetings he couldn't reschedule, but the truth was simpler and more painful. He was terrified. When his car pulled up to his house that evening, Nina was already there, standing in the massive foyer with a single backpack containing everything she owned. Mrs. Walsh, his housekeeper, stood beside her. The older woman had worked for Vincent for 12 years and had seen him through his darkest days. She gave him a look that said they would be talking later. "Welcome home," Vincent said, and the words felt strange in his mouth. This enormous house hadn't felt like a home in a very long time. Nina looked around with wide eyes. The foyer alone was bigger than the entire common room at Sunrise. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Marble floors reflected the light. Everything was perfect, expensive, and completely impersonal. "Let me show you to your room," Vincent said. He led her upstairs, Mrs. Walsh following behind. The room he'd prepared for Nina was at the end of the hall. He'd hired an interior designer, told them to create a space suitable for a 10-year-old girl. The result was something out of a magazine. Pink walls, a canopy bed with silk curtains, shelves full of books she'd never picked out, and in the corner, a beautiful upright piano. Nina walked slowly into the room, touching nothing. She looked like she was afraid everything might disappear if she reached for it. "If you don't like the color, we can repaint," Vincent said, suddenly awkward. "Or if you want different furniture, just let Mrs. Walsh know." "It's nice," Nina whispered. "Thank you." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. "Well," Vincent said, backing toward the door, "I'll let you settle in. Mrs. Walsh will show you where everything is. I have some work to finish in my office, but I'll see you at dinner." "He saw you at dinner" became his favorite phrase over the next few weeks. It was what he said every time he needed to escape Nina's quiet presence, her hopeful eyes, her obvious desire to connect with him. Work became his refuge. He left early in the mornings before she woke up. He came home late, often after she'd gone to bed. Mrs. Walsh did her best to fill the gap. She made Nina's favorite foods, helped her with homework, took her shopping for clothes that Nina actually liked instead of what designers thought she should like. But even Mrs. Walsh couldn't fix the distance between Nina and Vincent. Every evening, Nina would sit at the piano in her room and play. The music would drift through the house, beautiful and sad. Vincent would be in his office trying to focus on contracts and deals, but the music always found him. Sometimes he'd pause, his hand frozen over his keyboard, just listening. But he never went to her room, never asked her to play for him, never acknowledged that he heard her at all. One night, Mrs. Walsh knocked on his office door. She didn't wait for permission to enter. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. Vincent looked up from his computer. "Is something wrong? Does Nina need something?" "Yes, Mr. Harper, she needs you." He sighed and removed his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. "She has everything. The best schools, the best food, her own piano, anything she could want. Except a father." The word hung in the air between them like an accusation. "I'm doing my best," Vincent said defensively. "No, you're not." Mrs. Walsh's voice was firm but not unkind. "You're hiding, just like you've been hiding for the last 15 years. Vincent's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. That girl plays piano every single night, hoping you'll come listen. She sets the table for dinner even though you're never home to eat with her. She leaves drawings on your desk that you never acknowledge. She's trying so hard to reach you and you keep running away." "I'm not running," Vincent snapped. But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. Mrs. Walsh pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited. "Do you know what day it is tomorrow?" Vincent glanced at his calendar. "Thursday." It would have been Lily's 25th birthday. The name hit Vincent like a physical blow. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. Don't say her name." "Someone needs to," Mrs. Walsh said gently. "Someone needs to talk about her, about what happened, about why you adopted Nina, and then refused to let her in." Vincent walked to the window, his back to Mrs. Walsh. His hands were shaking. "I shouldn't have made that promise. I should have walked away. I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Be a father again." The words burst out of him, raw and painful. "I already failed at it once. I already lost everything. And now I've brought this child into my home, and every time I look at her, every time I hear her play that piano, I see Lily. I remember what it felt like to have a daughter, and I remember what it felt like to lose her." Mrs. Walsh's voice was soft. "Nina isn't Lily. I know that, and you didn't fail Lily. What happened wasn't your fault. I should have been there." Vincent pressed his forehead against the cool glass. "I was working late, closing some stupid deal that seemed so important at the time. My wife called, said Lily wasn't feeling well. I told her I'd be home soon. But soon wasn't soon enough." He'd never said these words out loud before, never let himself remember that night in detail. But it all came flooding back now. The call from his wife, hysterical, screaming that something was wrong. The ambulance ride. The doctor saying words like meningitis and septic shock, and "I'm sorry, we did everything we could." Lily was 10 years old, Vincent continued, his voice breaking. "The same age Nina is now. She played piano. She had her mother's eyes and my stubbornness. And then she was just gone. 3 days from healthy to dead. My wife blamed me, said if I'd come home earlier, if I'd been there, maybe we would have gotten Lily to the hospital sooner. Maybe she'd still be alive. You don't know that. My wife left 6 months later, said she couldn't look at me anymore without seeing the daughter we'd lost. And you know what? I understood, because I couldn't look at myself either." Mrs. Walsh stood and walked over to him. "So you buried yourself in work, built an empire, made more money than you could ever spend. Also, you'd never have to stop and feel anything." "It worked," Vincent said bitterly. "For 15 years it worked just fine, until you met Nina." "Until I met Nina," he repeated quietly. "And now I've made the same mistake again. I made a promise without thinking it through. I brought this child into my life and I'm terrified. Every single day I'm terrified. What if something happens to her? What if I fail her the way I failed Lily? What if I let myself care and then lose everything again?" "So instead you're choosing to lose her slowly," Mrs. Walsh said. "You're in the same house, but you might as well be on different planets. That little girl is lonely, Mr. Harper. She's hurting. She lost her mother, and now the man who promised to give her a home won't even eat dinner with her." Vincent closed his eyes. "I don't know how to fix this. Start small. Have breakfast with her tomorrow. Listen when she plays piano. Ask her about her day. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present." After Mrs. Walsh left, Vincent stood alone in his office for a long time. Down the hall, he could hear Nina playing piano. The melody was sad tonight, lonelier than usual. He wondered if she knew. If somehow this little girl who barely spoke could sense that she was living with a ghost of a man, someone who was too afraid to really live because living meant risking loss. Vincent walked slowly to his bedroom. On his nightstand was a photo he kept face down. He picked it up and looked at it for the first time in months. Lily smiled back at him, caught mid-laugh at her 10th birthday party. The last birthday she'd ever have. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the photo. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." But maybe a small voice in his head suggested maybe he could still save Nina. And maybe, just maybe, she could save him too. Vincent woke up early the next morning with a knot in his stomach. He'd barely slept, tossing and turning, thinking about everything Mrs. Walsh had said, about Lily, about Nina, about the man he'd become and the man he used to be. He got dressed and went downstairs before his usual time. Mrs. Walsh was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast. She looked surprised to see him. "You're up early," she said, trying to hide her smile. "I thought I'd have breakfast here today, with Nina." Mrs. Walsh's entire face softened. "She'll like that." When Nina came down 20 minutes later, she froze at the dining room entrance. Vincent sat at the table with coffee and a newspaper, something she'd never seen before. Usually the house was empty when she woke up, just Mrs. Walsh bustling around the kitchen. "Good morning," Vincent said, setting down his paper. His voice sounded awkward, like he was reading from a script. "Good morning," Nina replied quietly. She slid into her chair, still watching him like he might disappear. Mrs. Walsh brought out pancakes, eggs, and fresh fruit. For several minutes they ate in silence. Vincent tried to think of something to say, but everything that came to mind sounded stupid. "How's school? Do you like your room? The weather's nice today." All generic, meaningless things. Finally, Nina spoke first. "You don't have to do this." Vincent looked up, surprised. "Do what?" "Pretend Mrs. Walsh probably told you to have breakfast with me. But you don't have to. I know you're busy." The matter-of-fact way she said it broke something in Vincent's chest. This little girl had already learned to expect so little from the adults in her life. "You're right," Vincent said slowly. "Mrs. Walsh did tell me I needed to do better. But she was right too. I haven't been fair to you. I brought you here and then I hid from you." Nina pushed her eggs around her plate. "Is it because of your daughter?" Vincent's fork clattered against his plate. "What?" "Mrs. Walsh told me you had a daughter who died. That's why you have that piano in your office that no one's allowed to touch." It was hers. Vincent's throat felt tight. He'd forgotten about that piano. Lily's piano. He'd moved it to his office after she died and hadn't let anyone near it in 15 years. How had Nina known about it? "I saw it once when the door was open," Nina continued. "There's a picture frame on top. A little girl with dark hair. She looks happy." "She was happy," Vincent said quietly. "Most of the time, anyway. She was a lot like you, actually. Quiet. Loved music more than anything. She used to play for hours. What happened to her?" Vincent wanted to change the subject, to run away like he always did. But something in Nina's eyes stopped him. She wasn't asking out of curiosity. She was asking because she understood loss, because she'd felt it too. "She got sick," Vincent said. "Very sick, very fast. I wasn't there when it started. I was working. By the time I got to the hospital, it was too late. The doctors couldn't save her." Nina nodded slowly. "My mom died fast too. One minute we were driving home from the grocery store. The next minute a truck ran a red light and hit us. I don't even remember the crash. Just waking up in the hospital and a lady telling me my mom was gone. They sat in silence, two people who'd lost everything, finally acknowledging the grief that connected them. "I'm sorry," Vincent said. "I'm sorry you went through that. And I'm sorry I've been such a terrible father to you these past few weeks." "You're scared," Nina said simply. "That I'll die too." The bluntness of it, the way she just put it out there, made Vincent's eyes sting. "Yes, I'm terrified. Every single day." "Me too," Nina whispered. "I'm scared all the time. Scared that you'll decide you don't want me, that I'll have to go back, that everyone I care about will leave." Vincent reached across the table and took her small hand in his. It was the first time he'd really touched her since she'd moved in. "I'm not sending you back. I promise. I just need to figure out how to do this without being so afraid." Nina squeezed his hand. "Maybe we can figure it out together." That evening, Vincent came home early for the first time in weeks. He found Nina in her room sitting at her piano with music sheets spread everywhere. She was working on a piece, playing the same section over and over, getting frustrated each time she made a mistake. He stood in the doorway, watching. She was so focused she didn't notice him at first. Her fingers stumbled over a complicated run of notes and she made a sound of frustration. "You're rushing the transition," Vincent said. Nina jumped, startled. She turned to face him, her cheeks flushing red. "I didn't know you were there. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." He stepped into the room, something he'd never done before. "May I?" Nina slid over on the piano bench, making room. Vincent sat down beside her, his hands hovering over the keys. He hadn't played in 15 years. Hadn't even wanted to. Music reminded him too much of Lily, of everything he'd lost. But now, sitting next to Nina, his fingers found the keys almost automatically. Muscle memory took over. He played the section she'd been struggling with slowly, showing her where to pause, where to let the notes breathe. "Like that," he said. "Don't rush. Let each note have its moment." Nina tried again, this time following his rhythm. It was better, smoother. She looked up at him with surprised delight. "You can play." "I used to. I taught Lily. Her mother wanted her to have professional lessons, but Lily insisted I teach her. Vincent smiled at the memory, a real smile that reached his eyes. She said she wanted to play like me, not like some stranger. Will you teach me? Nina asked hopefully. Vincent hesitated. Teaching Nina meant spending time with her. Really spending time with her. It meant opening himself up to all the feelings he'd been running from. It meant risking his heart again, please, Nina added. I can learn from videos, but it's not the same. I want someone to show me, someone who understands. Okay, Vincent heard himself say. Yes, I'll teach you. Nina's face lit up in a way he'd never seen before. Really? Really? We can start now if you want. Show me what else you're working on. They spent the next 2 hours at the piano. Vincent corrected her posture, showed her different techniques, played duets with her. At first his hands were stiff, uncomfortable, but gradually the music worked its magic. The notes flowed. The melodies connected them in a way words never could. When Nina finally yawned, Vincent realized how late it had gotten. Time for bed, he said. Nina stood reluctantly. At the door she paused. Thank you. For playing with me. For teaching me. Thank you for being patient with me, Vincent replied. I know I haven't been easy to live with. That night, after Nina went to bed, Vincent returned to his office. He stood in front of Lily's piano for a long time, just looking at it. The picture on top showed Lily at 9 years old, grinning at the camera with a missing front tooth. I met someone you would have liked, Vincent said to the picture. Her name is Nina. She plays piano like you did. She's brave and kind and so talented. I think you two would have been friends. He picked up the picture and really looked at it. For the first time in years, remembering Lily didn't just hurt, it also made him smile. She'd had such a good laugh. Such a big heart. She would have wanted him to move forward, to let himself care about someone again. I'm going to try, Vincent promised. I'm going to try to be the father she needs. The father you deserved. I'm scared, but I'm going to try. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. Vincent started coming home for dinner. He helped Nina with her homework. They played piano together every evening, him teaching her new techniques, her showing him songs she'd composed. He learned that she loved science but hated math, that her favorite color was actually blue, not pink, that she collected rocks and could name at least 20 types of minerals. He attended her school conferences and met her teachers. He took her to the park, to museums, to a concert where they heard a famous pianist perform. Slowly, carefully, he led her into his life, and slowly, carefully, she led him into hers. One night, after a particularly good piano lesson, Nina looked up at him with serious eyes. Can I ask you something? Anything. What should I call you? I've just been saying you this whole time. Mrs. Walsh calls you Mr. Harper, but that seems weird for me to say. Vincent's heart clenched. He knew what she was really asking. What do you want to call me? Nina bit her lip, nervous. Is it okay if I call you Dad? Or is that too much? I don't want to replace your daughter or anything. I just thought maybe... Yes, Vincent interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, you can call me Dad, I'd really like that. Nina smiled, and it was like the sun coming out after a storm. Okay, Dad. The words settled over them, warm and right. Vincent pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. For the first time since Lily died, he let himself feel it all. The grief, yes, but also the love. The fear, but also the hope. The pain of loss, but also the joy of this unexpected second chance. I love you, Nina. He whispered. I love you too, Dad. She whispered back. And in that moment, two broken hearts began to heal. 6 months after Nina first called Vincent Dad, spring arrived with warm sunshine and blooming flowers. Nina had been practicing for weeks, sometimes for hours each day. The youth concert at the community center was the biggest performance of her life, and she wanted everything to be perfect. Vincent sat on her bed, watching her try on different dresses for the 3rd time that week. She held up a blue one, then a white one, her face scrunched in concentration. The blue one, Vincent said. It matches your eyes. Nina looked at herself in the mirror, holding the blue dress against her body. You think so? I know so. You'll be beautiful, but more importantly, your music will be beautiful. She hung the dress carefully in her closet and sat down next to him. I'm nervous. That's normal. I used to get nervous before big business presentations. Still do sometimes, really? But you always seem so confident, Vincent smiled. Being confident and being nervous aren't opposites. You can be both at the same time. The nervousness means you care about doing well. That's a good thing. Nina leaned against his shoulder. What if I mess up? What if I forget the notes or my hands freeze? Then you take a breath and start again. Nobody expects perfection, Nina. They just want to hear you play. He wrapped his arm around her. Besides, I'll be right there in the audience. If you get scared, just look for me. You promise you'll be there? No last-minute meetings or business emergencies? I promise. Nothing is more important than being there for you. The night of the concert, Vincent arrived at the community center an hour early. He wanted to get a seat in the front row, wanted to see every expression on Nina's face when she played. Mrs. Walsh came with him, dressed in her nicest outfit. She'd been crying on and off all day, proud of how far both Nina and Vincent had come. The community center was filling up quickly. Parents and families crowded into the auditorium, finding seats, setting up cameras. Vincent recognized some faces from Nina's school. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, waved at him from across the room. He'd gotten to know her well over the past months, attending every parent-teacher conference, every school event. Then he saw someone he hadn't expected. Mrs. Patterson from Sunrise Children's Home walked in with a small group of children. Tommy was there, along with several other kids Vincent remembered from his visit all those months ago. Mrs. Patterson spotted Vincent and made her way over. Mr. Harper, it's good to see you. Mrs. Patterson. Vincent stood and shook her hand. I didn't know you were coming. Nina invited us. She wanted the children from the home to see her perform. She's been visiting them once a month, did you know that? Teaching some of the younger ones basic piano. Vincent felt a surge of pride. Nina had never mentioned these visits. I didn't know. She's a special girl. You're very lucky. I know, Vincent said quietly. Trust me, I know. The children from Sunrise found seats near the front. Tommy caught Vincent's eye and gave him a small nod. Not quite friendly, but respectful. Vincent nodded back. The lights dimmed and the concert began. Young musicians came and went across the stage. A boy played violin. A girl sang. A small group performed a piano duet. Each performance was met with enthusiastic applause from the proud families. Then it was Nina's turn. She walked onto the stage in her blue dress, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked so small standing next to the grand piano. Vincent's heart pounded in his chest. He was more nervous than she probably was. Nina sat at the piano bench and adjusted her position, just like he'd taught her. She took a deep breath, and for a moment, Vincent thought she might look out into the crowd for him. But she didn't need to. She closed her eyes and began to play. The first notes filled the auditorium. Vincent recognized the melody immediately. It was the same piece she'd played that day at the children's home, the performance that had changed everything. But it was different now. More mature, more confident. The scared little girl who had played to prove herself had become a young musician who played because she loved it. The music told the same story it had before. Loss and loneliness and pain. But this time there was more to it. As Nina's fingers moved across the keys, the melody evolved into something new. The sadness was still there, but it was joined by notes of joy, of hope, of a journey from darkness into light. Vincent watched her face as she played. She was completely lost in the music, the way she always was. But there was a peace in her expression that hadn't been there before. A contentment. She wasn't running from her pain anymore. She was acknowledging it, accepting it, and then moving beyond it. The music built to a powerful crescendo. Nina's whole body moved with the rhythm, her hands dancing across the keys with grace and strength. In that moment, Vincent didn't see a 10-year-old orphan. He saw an artist, a survivor, his daughter. The final section of the piece was new. Nina had composed it just last week, and she'd been secretive about it, saying it was a surprise. Now, as the notes flowed through the auditorium, Vincent understood why. The melody was hopeful, almost celebratory. It spoke of new beginnings and second chances. It spoke of finding family in unexpected places and learning to love again after loss. As Nina played the last few measures, she opened her eyes and looked directly at Vincent. She was crying, but she was also smiling. The final notes rang out pure and clear and then faded into silence. For a heartbeat, the entire auditorium was quiet. Then the applause started. People stood up clapping and cheering. The children from Sunrise were on their feet. Tommy shouting his approval. Mrs. Walsh was openly sobbing into a tissue. Mrs. Patterson wiped tears from her eyes, but Vincent barely noticed any of it. He was standing, applauding, his own tears streaming down his face. Nina stood and took a bow. Then she spoke into the microphone, her voice soft but clear. "I want to dedicate this performance to 3 people," she said. "First, to my mom, who taught me that music can heal anything. Second, to Lily, a girl I never met but who I think about often. And third, to my dad, Vincent, who gave me a second chance at having a family." She looked directly at him. "Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for teaching me that it's okay to be scared and to love anyway. Thank you for being my dad." Vincent couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only stand there as his heart broke open in the best possible way. Nina left the stage and ran down the aisle. He met her halfway, scooping her up in his arms and holding her tight. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and they stood there in the middle of the auditorium, both crying, both laughing, both completely and perfectly happy. "I'm so proud of you," Vincent whispered into her hair. "So incredibly proud." "I love you, Dad," Nina whispered back. "I love you too, sweetheart." More than anything in this world. Later that night, after they'd gotten home and Nina had changed into her pajamas, Vincent found her sitting at her piano. Not playing, just sitting, her fingers resting on the keys. "Can't sleep?" he asked from the doorway. "Too excited," Nina admitted. "Was I really good?" "You were amazing, truly." She patted the bench beside her and he sat down. They'd done this so many times over the past months that it felt completely natural now. This piano, this room, this little girl beside him, it all felt like home. "You know what's funny?" Nina said. "When you first came to the children's home, I thought you were mean. You were so cold and you made that joke about adopting someone like it was all a big game." "I was mean," Vincent agreed. "I was a bitter, lonely man who'd forgotten how to care about anything. But you weren't mean. Not really. You were just hurt." "Like me," Vincent pulled her close. "We were both hurt, but we helped each other heal, didn't we?" "Yeah," Nina said softly. "We did." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight stream through the window. Vincent thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago. The man who'd walked into that children's home with nothing but cynicism and empty promises. The man who'd built walls so high that nothing could touch him. That man was gone now. In his place was someone better. Someone who came home for dinner every night. Someone who helped with homework and attended school plays and played piano duets with his daughter. Someone who had learned that love was worth the risk of loss. "Dad?" Nina said sleepily. "Yeah, sweetheart. I'm glad you kept your promise." Vincent kissed the top of her head. "Me too, Nina, me too." Outside, the world continued on. But inside this house, inside this room, a miracle had happened. 2 broken hearts had found each other. A cynical millionaire had learned to love again. An orphaned girl had found a father. And music, that universal language of the soul, had brought them together and made them whole. It wasn't the ending either of them had expected. But it was the ending they both needed. And sometimes that's exactly how the best stories go.